Right, okay then, we'll make a start. Apologies for that. The sound isn't working, so I'm going to have to start with a bit of an apology, just because there are some videos in this. So you're either going to have to rely on the validity of my commentary through the videos or some of the subtitles that are presented on there. Well, if I could just ask if you could make sure that you sat with someone or a group of people, just so you've got someone to reflect with and talk with as we go throughout this presentation. Because I am going to have a few tasks as we go through it in the first instance. So first things first, thank you to Martin, John and the RFU for inviting me in. Just as a bit of background on myself, my name is Michael Ashford. I split my time between a number of things. First, I'm a lecturer at the University of Edinburgh in sports coaching. I'm also a coach developer for a company called Grey Matters Performance, and I also work as a consultant in high performance rugby, having previously been head of coach development at Wasps before, well, you all know what happened there. But anyway, in regards to today, what I'm going to try and do is offer some insight around coaching players to acquire and refine skill. And particularly, we're going to look at the distinction between those two things of acquiring skill and refining it. And with any presentation, as I know some of the RFU guys will know in here, I'll try and make the complex as simple as it can be, but no simpler. As you will know, that coaching is an inherently complex skill. It's a difficult task at any point because you've got to meet different personalities, different players where they are at that particular time. However, that comes with a health warning that if I ever speak in jargon, if there's anything you don't understand, just put your hand up and say, Mike, that's absolute nonsense. Can you please describe to me what that means? Or can we just move on? Okay? The second point that I really want to get across is I don't want this to be an information sharing event or an information giving event. I kind of want this session to be done collaboratively, and I know this room isn't the best designed for that. It's not a seminar room, we're in a lecture theatre. However, please be forthcoming with your opinions, please be forthcoming with your insight in the tasks. What I'll do when I ask questions, I'll come down to the front so you don't feel like you're speaking to me up here. All good? Okay, so You'll find out that I love a cliche as we progress throughout this presentation. I think they're nice catch-alls for some learning moments. And what I always like to start with is this idea of beginning with the end in mind. And this end in mind is particularly what I hope that you'll have experienced and reflected on by the end of the next hour and 15 minutes. So first things first, as I said before, I'm hoping that we'll be able to consider the subtle differences between skill acquisition and skill refinement. Within a particular rugby context, and I'm hoping that I can meet you where you are in your coaching with particular problems that you might be facing around developing players' skill. And then secondly, I'm hoping, as I said, explore and discuss some key thinking tools, and the reason why I call them thinking tools is because there's nothing practical as a good theory. And what I mean by that is that if a theory isn't practical, it's rendered useless. So in essence, what we're going to try and do is think, whenever I present an idea or present a tool, I'm hoping that you'll be able to relate that tool directly to the challenges that you face in practice. Okay, so in other words, everything I hope I present here will be meaningful to you in your current context. And as I said before, I really want to hit home that idea of discussion. When we do the tasks, I'm hoping you'll be able to discuss and reflect with one another. So just as a bit of an initiator and a point of reference that's going to hopefully run as a golden thread throughout this particular presentation, I want you to have a think of a particular technique or skill that you're currently supporting players to develop. Okay? And over the next 2 minutes, I want you to just tell the person or persons around you the particular problem and the current coaching methods, and by methods I mean the way you interact with your players, the way you shape practice, that you're currently using in order to overcome that problem or support them with it. Okay? So we'll say 3 minutes actually, seeing as we're just getting started, so I'll hand it over to you guys. The reason why I've asked you that is, as I said before, I want to use theoretical thinking tools. And what I mean by that is hopefully now you've got a reference point in your mind that when I present something or an idea, that you're thinking about that idea in reference to your own coaching. Okay, because I really want to bring that element of practice to the surface. And as I said before, any questions, or if you want to stop me at any point, please do. So as you know, there's been an issue with the sound. Luckily, the first one's got some subtitles on it. But this is a bit of a task. And again, I want you to work in your small groups around this task. And maybe without the sound, it might be a little bit more interesting. But what I really want you to think about and discuss is what coaching methods are being used here to develop skill, the type of skill, okay? So I'll just show you the first one.
Okay, blokes, what I need a bloke on each of the cones, please. Nope. Body tilt. So what I want early catch, I want down lines, and I want a tempo change. I need those three things. Right, away we go. Well done. Good start, good start. Good skills, Robbo, good skills. Early catch.
I'll sniff in there.
Early catch. What I want now is I need that tempo change. Sit them down. Dig in, sit them down. So a little tempo change, please. Good. Okay, boys, you get beaten on the inside shoulder, you owe me 10 push-ups. That's it. Oh, you had him, you had him, you had him. Belly, you were lucky, mate, lucky. Hey? Ah, that's brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Hey, it's a good shot. Hey, that's the one. That's the one. You nearly had Lenny giving me 10 push-ups there. Lenny, you're close. You're close. Last one, boys. Last one. One more rep. Oh, not bad. Not bad. Right, boys, pick up the cones, please. Pick up those cones. Okay, you're over on the water balls once you do that. Yeah, Rob. Thanks, mate.
Now we're going to jump to a completely different skill. Okay, we look at the scrummaging coach from the Crusaders. Now this isn't going to have subtitles, unfortunately. But what I want you to keep an eye on is, just because there's no sound, is just keep an eye on the way he interacts and the methods he might be using, because it's not always verbal. Okay? So it's just a clip of a number of activities. And again, I'll give you some time to discuss after this one, just to consider what methods are at play. But just have a watch for me.
We need to do to execute our plan so we can get forward, you know. And you boys are good at that. Set. Just think about getting your chest up a bit more. Chest to chin, just a fraction. Set. Good punch, good punch. Nice fire, Sam. Real good connection there. Well done, boys. Real good.
Nice. Just keep talking out there. Yeah.
Do we want to do one as the starters if there's a, like, if we have the big gap?
Yep. Great idea, Joe. You're on today. Set. Yeah, well done. Real nice mic with your shoulder there. Hook his knee over the toe, pretty good. Makes it easy to get the foot back, so we're not got weight on our heels. Boys, I like our height. Hey, real good height. We're nice and flat, and we extend through after the set. And Mikey, your right shoulder's turned on really good. Keep your shoulders turned right on. Little bit of loading, little bit of loading. Get him up, us. Get him up, get him up. Flat, flat. Well done, Drewza. Good boy. Scrum first, hook second. Keep that ball nice and flat, Drummo. Get that knee over your toe a little bit more. You know what I mean? Relax that knee. There you go. Then you got more weight through the ball of your foot, not on your heel. Set. That's it. See your knee just over your toe.
On the ball of the balls of my
Yeah.
feet there,
As opposed to on your heel, which means you can scratch back, as opposed to your heel is flat, and then you've got a step back which opens up your hip, which gives an opportunity for the tighty to put more pressure on you. Knee over your toe, scratch back into strong, bang.
Okay, so eerily silent whilst we watch those videos. Apologies for that. I actually thought it was quite a cool little task without the sound though, because there's quite a lot in there, right? So let's take 2 minutes, have a discussion in your groups and consider the different methods at play there. And what I found really interesting is the body language of the players in some of those interactions as well, and what they might have been doing as he was offering those interactions. Okay, off we go. I'll give you 2-3 minutes. Brilliant. So have a think and just reflect. We're going to move on to this later. What might that do to the variability and difference in movement that can be accepted from a skill refinement, skill acquisition point of view? If the skill itself is different, does that mean what you accept as differences around the skill particularly can change? Just something to reflect on. Okay, so we're just going to spend a couple of minutes busting some jargon because I can't get around this because it's in the title, but just some key terms for your insight. Okay, first thing, acquisition, the learning of a new skill, habit or quality. Okay, something that's presented that's new, something that's brand new that they have to interact with and learn. Secondly, refinement, the change of technique of skill from an old way to a new way. Is there anything particular around law changes at the moment that would really reference this particular point? I love the satirical laughs in the room there, nice. Yeah, the tackle height, absolutely, and we can reference that later on. But in essence, refinement is that idea of where a skill has been learned, okay, but there's something erroneous, there's something not quite right, so it needs to be refined to a more optimal movement pattern. Then we've got this idea of embedding. We're not going to touch too much on this today, but only a little bit later on. But this is the idea that we implant an idea or feeling. And that was why I said, it reminded me of that particular point around how do we get someone to consider a movement from A to B and a boundary of where they need to get to. But this idea that something becomes ingrained within a context, it becomes subconscious, it becomes automatic over time. Retrieval. So the act or process of getting something back, this is what we're always aiming for, right? If we do a particular practice in a session, we want them to be able to retrieve that level of performance, that level of movement, okay, when they next come into that particular practice. And then finally, transfer, which is the ultimate. Does the technique or skill hold up in competition circumstances? Okay? And that distinction between learning and performance is really quite important. Don't worry about making notes on this too much. There are going to be some tasks where I'm going to ask you to write some stuff down, but you will get these slides. And there's also a recording for you as well. Okay, so I'm going to skip this one, obviously, because we've got no sound. But this is a guy called Robert Bjork. Okay, and Robert Bjork's an educational psychologist. And fundamentally, he has driven a lot of the skill acquisition literature that's been adopted in coaching as well. And it's all come from this idea of desirable difficulties. Rather than me talking at you around desirable difficulties, does anyone want to hazard a guess of what this might mean? Absolutely. So there's a bit of a hypocrisy between learning and performance, right? So if you think about error rate as a really good indicator of skill development or skill acquisition, Robert Bjork would say that realistically, the more successful we are, the better we should become, is the original assumption that we might make. However, it's counterintuitive of what the data actually suggests. He says that there's a sweet spot in learning where when I'm making an appropriate level of mistakes whilst I'm still motivated, okay, my performance might drop, but the rules of transfer are much more effective, okay? So whilst my performance drops here, my retention over time and my transfer into performance becomes more effective. In other words, I'm acquiring more skill as I go through it, okay? Does that mean, however, there's not a place for errorless learning or being perfect? What do we think? Nice. So there's an element of motivation there that might underpin that. Brilliant point. Yeah. Nice. Not the carrot and stick, right? Okay, great stuff. 2 examples. I'm going to show 2 video examples again and I want you to think about where the desirable difficulty might lie, not only from a task point of view, but think of it from a psychological point of view as well.
It's down. Okay, we'll just fix it. That's all right. Take your time.
What are you doing there? What are you doing there?
I'm gonna pick him up. Pick him up, mate. Pick him up.
Do it then.
Okay. All right. I'll give you one more tip. This time, when you drive again, I want you to try to pick up his leg. So pick up, drive him through. Drive him through. Pick him up and drive him through. So you can pick him up and drive him through. If you put him on his ass, he might whack you.
Don't forget to do the other stuff.
Yeah, pop
The hard bits first. The hard bits first.
110%, you've got to be into everything. So whether that's a walkthrough or a line-out meeting, you've got to be so switched on all the time. And then obviously in training, the physicality. A step up from Leicester, the boys are just a bit stronger, a bit faster. But yeah, really enjoyed it.
So you're carrying as if you're carrying for the sake of the pad, if you know what I mean? So like, if I'm up, you're up. Like if I'm pushing you down, you're always stumbling, as opposed to just carrying the way you want to carry. Do you know what I mean or not?
Yeah.
Like you need to attack it. At the moment I'm attacking you and you're stopping me.
Yeah.
You need to attack the pad. Because when you carry, you want to beat the defender. You don't want to wait to see what the defender's doing. Do you know what I mean? How much better was that? Same again. Right, box clever now. Box clever now. Box clever, think. Yes! Nice boy.
Okay, you got to defend.
Okay, so whilst that's still playing, how difficult is that as an activity? Not very. Okay. Is there a desirable difficulty in that clip, however? Ellis Genge, nice. So there's a social dimension to this. There's a power aspect, isn't there? Who else is in that clip at the particular time as well? Yeah, okay, so I've got the captain at that particular time, and I've got my head coach. And the feedback Ellis Genge is providing to him is literally, I want you to carry into me, I want you to pick me up, I want you to dominate. So the desirable difficulty isn't in the task itself, it lies elsewhere, which is interesting because that means that skill acquisition isn't just a physical act or a technical act, it means it's biopsychosocial. There's a psychological element that connects you to the game. There's a social element that connects you to the game. So just because there's a simple, blocked, isolated task doesn't mean it can't connect, and it doesn't mean it can't result in learning. Does that make some sense? On the flip side, luckily this doesn't have sound, but just have a watch of this. So bearing in mind that this is an attacking practice, okay, designed to manipulate space, designed to catch, pass, execute skill. What's the level of success? Very low. Does that mean it's a poor practice? Okay, nice. So, just one last thing. There is, however, an exception to the rule. Okay, through understanding the law of transfer, so transfer is much better created through more random, through more difficult practices where the success rate and failure rate meet in the middle. However, if you provide understanding to a player, the laws of transfer change. What do you think I mean by that? If I'm a player and I understand why a particular movement or why a particular skill might fit, why might that mean that the rules of transfer around the difficulty of a task changes? Okay, great. There's a motivational aspect. It's a bridge, isn't it? It's a performance. As we said earlier, the imagery piece, that whilst he's moving his shoulder, he's not actually doing the movement there, is he? He's thinking about the movement, he's considering the movement, he's engaging in imagery and almost enacting the movement as he's watching that particular video. But it's bridging to the performance, and that's where the laws of transfer might change. So, open question. What are the only two tools we have that can support our players learning at any one time? Two overarching tools. Okay, that would be one, a type of one of the things. There's mumbling, so don't be afraid to get it wrong. Desirable difficulties, guys, yeah? Observe, so again, that would be a type. Communication would be a type. Okay, nice. So the practice design, which is Dickon's going to talk about later on, okay? So the way we might influence practice, design practice. So we've got practice design on one side, what's on the other side? Again, that would be a type of this other thing. Interactions, nice. So our coaching approach, our coach behaviours, our interactions. Okay, so in essence, we've got our coaching approach, the way we interact with the players around practice. So using the iPad, using instruction, using questioning, using feedback. And on the flip side is the way we design the learning for the players. Okay, the way we design practice. Okay? And in essence, these are the two things that create the player experience, in reference particularly to acquiring and refining skill in this particular context. What does all this depend on, however? Pardon? Nice, so the setting, the context, really good. Who we might be working with, excellent. What else? Who said that, sorry? Excellent, okay. Why is that, would that come first?
Yeah.
Why?
If you don't know where you're going, you can pinball anyway.
Absolutely, so if we've got clarity on our intentions, okay, what are, so remember the cliches that I spoke about at the first point? My advice is always to begin with the end in mind. If you've got a particular skill, movement, particular tactic, a particular intention for the end of the session, okay, that's really going to drive why we might engage with a particular coaching approach and plan for that. It might drive why we might shape and influence practice activities and experiences. And in essence, these three things are all integrated. And if they're coherent with one another, the players is going to experience that coherence in the way you deliver that task. Okay, the evidence would actually suggest that demonstrations that are concurrent, positive demonstrations that are concurrent with instruction are really beneficial. Because as you said earlier, it manages the player to understand and break down the movement into its component parts and then piece it back together again. Has anyone come across the difference between coping and expert demonstrations before? So Abraham and Collins would suggest that you might use one or the other depending on the motivation of the particular player you're working with. If you want to build motivation, you might just get them to cope with a movement and then give them some encouragement around coping with that particular movement. If it's someone who you really need to build up to a particular boundary, then you might use an expert demo to guide that particular movement. Make some sense? And in essence, on the other side of things, I'm not going to touch too much on this because I don't want to steal Dickens' thunder. Hopefully you'll get a lot of this in the other room. But again, referring back to those two types of skills I presented previously around passing and around scrummaging, this idea of playing around with variability. Okay, a bandwidth of variability. What do I mean by variability? Different outcomes, okay. Let's be really specific to skill and technique here. So you say different outcomes, what might that mean in reference to technique or skill?
So the end result may differ depending on the way that the skill is achieved.
Nice, okay, and that might be more variable for a particular movement and less variable for another. So how does that refer to the passing and the scrummaging aspect? Which would be more variable from an acceptable point of view? Yeah. Yeah, so there's this idea of functional variability, that we never do the same movement twice. That would be much more true in a passing context, wouldn't it? Because it's much more variable. As long as the ball gets there and gets there appropriately, it's not too much of a problem. But it's interesting, how many coaches do we still see saying early catch, high elbow, so on and so forth, just as a critical point there. Much less variable for scrummaging. Why? Yep. How about the demands of the task itself? What are the consequences if you get that technique wrong? Yeah, there's only a very small, even from a biomechanical stance, there's a very small window of angle where you can actually push in that position, right? So all of a sudden there's much less variability, which is likely to result in much less variability in the way you shape practice. What do I mean by contextual interference? Yeah, excellent. Okay, so our contextual interference is our representativeness. How much does it look like the actual skill under competition circumstances? Okay, so just as a bit of a precursor there to Dickens' session. So just have a quick watch of these videos for me. Think about the levels of variability. Okay, think about the levels of contextual interference seen as we've got no sound. In this particular video as well, Eddie Jones comes in, offers some critical feedback, and then asks the one team to reflect on the other team's technique. Okay, so almost using the peer feedback, so that social dynamic again to offer that suggestion. Have a watch of this one.
¿Cómo se rompe esa superioridad numérica que tiene el rival cuando se suelta un tipo? Hay una cosa bien clara que hay que forzar. Que se desprenda la pelota. Yo estoy jugando, estamos jugando el gallego y yo contra Berizzo, ponete ahí. Acá somos superioridad numérica. Si vos me obligás a que yo me desprenda de la pelota y el juego se juega a otra altura, ya no hay más superioridad numérica. Porque yo que soy el que estoy de más, estoy acá atrás. Entonces, en este caso en particular, llevarlo al juego, se suelta el 5 rival. Si vos sos muy precavido, vas a obligarlo, vamos a ir hasta el gallego y le quitaremos la pelota allá. Si vos sos atrevido, forzarás que él se desprenda de la pelota, pero con capacidad de regreso tuyo.
What would be the difference between those two clips?
They're not really doing anything as such.
Okay.
They've had a quick interaction with the ball, but that's it. It's more about him talking verbally to them.
Is that a negative or a positive thing?
Depends what context it is, I suppose.
Does anyone know who that is? The coach? Yeah, Bielsa, nice, okay. Okay, so he goes on to talk about the technique of closing down the player, not moving backwards, turning your shoulders down to the floor, so on and so forth. Can we still get transfer from that interaction? Yeah. Why?
He's being really explicit.
And what is he trying to get with the players? Nice, understanding that word, so key. Has anyone ever told you that blocked and isolated practices don't work? Just a hands up in the room if you've heard that statement. Okay, nice. Does anyone agree with that statement? Okay, so there's a great paper by David Eccles and colleagues who looked at deliberate practice. And you've probably come across this idea of deliberate practice before, right? Commonly associated with the myth of 10,000 hours, which wasn't even the actual theory in of itself. But David would talk about this idea of slow and deliberate practice, which we all know is so important in rugby because we can't go full cock all week, can we? Because everyone will be cooked by the end of the week physically. Okay? So he will talk about this idea of being conscious and effortful in the slow and deliberate practice. And I think that's a real nice example of it. Okay? That idea of being intently conscious and effortful in the movements and the skills when you're focusing on a particular skill. Just the last one as an example. This Katie Ledecky, does anyone know who Katie Ledecky is? She's like, I think she's now got the top 20 800 meter times ever made in the world. She's one of the best swimmers, but this is her, at the end of every week on her long distance session, she has a glass of chocolate milk, and technically she's got an issue with her head position. Okay, just have a watch of this. You get the general gist, right? She gets the chocolate milk at the end of it. Obviously, it's a success story. But what's the coaching method behind this in direct contrast to the one at the top? What's the method at play here? Any coach interaction. Okay, so what's the difference? Nice, so the practice design itself provides the feedback, right? So we manipulate the conditions and the constraints of the practice to result in a particular skill or movement that might occur. I'm not saying either one of these is right or wrong, but what I'm offering is different ways that you might go about developing that particular skill. Has anyone come across the forgetting curve before? Yeah, so the reason why we talk about retention over and over again is this idea that we need to retain something over time because we are phenomenal at forgetting. And we're not only phenomenal at forgetting around knowledge, we're also phenomenal at forgetting movement. So yes, it might be successful, but you might need to revisit it 2 weeks down the line, 3 weeks down the line, so on and so forth. And that is a...
Through repeated practice, doesn't she? Because I'm sure there's another video showing her with a swimming pool full of chocolate milk.
Yeah. Absolutely, because what we tend to see on Instagram is always the best case scenario, right? This is probably 1 take out of 10. It's a really good point. So, I love the fact you just said that because that leads me into the last 20 minutes of this particular session. Okay, which is, I've presented some stuff around skill acquisition and how you might support players to acquire skill, the different methods. Now I'm going to give you a bit of a heuristic. What do you think I mean by a heuristic? Yeah, okay. A nice little rule of thumb that can support you when you're refining skill. Does anyone want to remind me what I mean by refinement? Yeah, so take something from an old way to a new way. Okay? Now what we're going to use is we're going to use Howie Carson and Dave Collins 5As. A nice simple model, okay, with loads of complexity underpinning it. So we start off with analysis. Then we move into raise awareness. Then we move into adjustment. We move into re-automization. Okay, I've given them loads of crap about that because it's a bit of a cop-out saying re-automization, but it's still an A in there. Okay, and then finally this idea of assurance. Okay, so you've got 5 A's of process. Now, we've got a particular example, as was mentioned earlier, okay, where skill refinement is going to be taking place worldwide in rugby. Okay, in other words, we're moving that. I love that. It took me ages. Okay, but in essence, we're moving that, the tackle height from there to there. Now, what I'm not going to do is just present this to you. You can do in groups of 4 or 5. You're in your groups already, so keep it in there. You might want to get a piece of paper and write down subtitles of analysis, awareness, adjustment, re-automization, or assurance. Or you can just talk about it. I don't mind. Whatever's going to be most beneficial for you. And what I want you to think about is it might be in reference to what you discussed at the start, or if you'd prefer, it might be in reference to the tackle height law change. Okay, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to present each stage in more depth, and I want you to think about, what your intentions might be, the methods you might use, but then importantly, the timeline for each of these stages. So we've got to keep in mind this idea of how long does learning actually take. So then, let's get started. Like I said, feel free, whether you want to write this down, but I'm just going to give you a few minutes to discuss after each stage. So the first stage, analysis. In essence, what we're trying to do is we're trying to identify the problem and get to the root cause of the problem. How many of you jump to the conclusion or the assumption at times of what the problem might be without first diagnosing the problem particularly? Just something to consider. Because if we shine a light somewhere, we might be missing a crack somewhere else. Okay? But then, in addition to that, we've also got to support the player to accept an intention to change. And how hard is that? Okay, so again, it comes back to that social piece. And we've also got to prioritize the reasons why. What can be your best friend here? It's been shown on those videos earlier on. What could be your best friend if you're trying to identify a particular deficiency? Video, nice. Absolutely. So we can present video or pictures to present the evidence to the players. Okay, we can talk through their thoughts. Okay, we all know that something done mutually is something done with them rather than to them is going to be much more efficient and helpful, right? Bring them along with you. And then it needs to fit within their day-to-day practice. So in other words, don't make the changes too drastically early on. Why is that important? Yeah, small steps, not getting overwhelmed, really good. There's a really good paper by Nicole Hodges and Keith Lose that's called the Extended Challenge Point Framework. And again, it refers back to the idea of the zone of proximal development, whereas we go too much, okay, they get too much failure, they lose motivation. We go too little, they get bored, they lose motivation. So somewhere there's got to be a sweet spot. Unfortunately, there's no rhyme or reason to what that sweet spot might be. And then from an indirect perspective, we might look at videos of performance. What's a vicarious experience? There's an academic word for you. Yeah, so living vicariously through someone else, but seeing a peer, seeing someone who's a similar age. Why might that be important? Absolutely, and it's self-efficacy, it's building the confidence in that particular movement, in that particular skill. What do I mean by generate brands and trademarks? John, Martin, we were talking about this last night around language. What do we mean about brands and trademarks? Absolutely, and the language that you might use around the particular movements themselves. So I've got a great example this week. I was away with modern pentathlon, and there's shooting in modern pentathlon. The coach and the athlete have got this idea of not too slow, let it flow when he shoots. And it's just the language that they've created around the refinement of the movement to let the rhythm get into the movement. It's just that idea of building it with the player particularly. Again, engaging in healthy discussion about it. Not too much, not too little. Again, why? Not too much, not too little. Definitely. So those discussions might not have to take place in person. Do you see what I mean? But too much, overwhelmed. Again, too little, no buy-in. I'm conscious of time. I still want to get some discussion in, but would we prefer to get through these 5 stages or discuss them through? What do we reckon?
I'd rather go through.
Nice, sweet, no problem at all. So, awareness. We've got to raise the awareness of what this is going to take. So in other words, we've got to get rid of that old way and come more to the new way, but we've really got to de-automate the well-established technique. What do we mean by de-automate the well-established? Yeah. Okay, so my man over here. Okay, what did you say earlier around the movement? You're on the spot now. Great stuff. So in other words, we want to create a gap, an awareness of what that gap might be. Okay? That's a really hard thing to do, isn't it, when we're talking about movement? Because we can do all the understanding and all the consideration up here, but that might not play out down here in the way that we move. Okay, so we might use contrast training. Anyone ever heard of this before? Okay, so we might purposefully practice the old movement versus the new movement. And cleverly, we might use different practice design in each of those and really bring them to the surface. So in the old way, we might do a game, but we might continuously ask them to use the old way. What questions might we be asking them around that particular movement whilst we're bringing that to the surface? If we're trying to de-automate it, especially around movement.
How does it feel?
Go on. What did you say, sorry?
Just asking them how does it feel?
Absolutely bang on. How does it feel? Why is that question so important? Yep, sure. If we're trying to de-automate, why is the feel important?
So they can understand the habits or learn it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're taking something that's tacit, that's locked in up here, you're bringing it to the surface, and then they go, oh, that feels normal to me now. Okay, so when you do the new way, how's that going to feel to them? Initially? Strange, different. But all of a sudden, what have you created by doing that? What's there between the old way and new way? There's a difference in the feel of the movement, and you've brought that to the surface. Okay? And then we can offer primes and reminders. So again, go back to the brands and the trademarks, the language you might use. You promote the feel of the movement wherever possible through the language that you might use, through analogies, so on and so forth. Now we might consider the use of role models. Why? Why now role models? So again, all your interactions should be on the contrast between the old way and the new way. The feel of the movement, the outcome of the movement, so on and so forth. And then we move into the real hard part, the adjustment, which is in essence probably the most important part, right? Because now we've got the feel of the two movements, we want to get rid of the old, in with the new, okay, and really make that movement pattern and that skillful pattern modified to that optimal level. Why might here we start to employ self-directed practice? And what do I mean by self-directed practice? Absolutely. So let's go back to that conscious and effortful piece. You can give a player an activity that might just be a general team-based activity. You want to know, are they thinking about the old way versus new way? Are they thinking about that movement pattern as they interact with whatever it might be? Do they have the capacity to switch in between? Okay, so in other words, you want them deliberately focusing on that particular movement, that particular skill, whilst they're interacting with those practices. And this is where we might go from solving the problems for the players by giving them a new movement to setting problems for the players. Okay, for them to use that movement to overcome whatever it might be. Okay, so initially from a carry standpoint, we might use 4 Fs. Footwork, fend, fight, okay, so on and so forth. We might give that to them as a problem solving tool for them to deal with when they carry. But then, as we move into the problem setting, we might give them tasks where the information is presented clearly to them to manipulate that space, to engage in that particular movement. Make some sense? And this is where the language becomes really important, because if they're not doing it, if they're not consciously effortful, what do we then need to do? What do we need to be aware of? If you're working with a particular individual on a particular movement and we want them to engage in self-directed practice, what do we need to do if they're not? Yeah. And if we've got a language set up that we've built with the athlete and we have command words available, what might that do? Yeah, you might have to say one word and all of a sudden that athlete switch back in. Make some sense? I need to stop saying that makes some sense. You're always going to nod, right? Okay, so this is where we move from vicarious experiences to more success in their own. Because in essence, we want to build that confidence, don't we? Okay? So we start to show vicarious experiences, but also performance accomplishments. Them accomplishing the movement. And in addition, we might start to monitor progress over time. So if we've got real good clarity on what that movement might look like and we've got access to recording equipment, we might all of a sudden come up with some sequential frequency-based data that gives us a decent insight as to how things are improving. And that might carry into competition as well. Just a cautious question here. What's going to happen in competition when they engage with this movement? Go on, Coops, you did like an aeroplane then. Do you want to explain with that movement?
Depending how far along they are, they'll just revert back to until they get more comfortable using it.
Nice, so they'll revert back, or if they are using it, what's likely to happen to performance? Massively. And what do we have to do when that dip happens? Be patient and be okay with it. Which is really hard, right? But we're in the game of development here. Re-automate, so in essence we want to go now, okay, now we've got buy-in, now they've got the movement, they're applying the movement, but now we need to make that less conscious. Why is it important to make it less conscious? You come across cognitive load before? Working memory capacity? If I'm flooded, if I'm clouded, I don't see information. And we still want them interacting with game information, right? Because they still need to develop other areas of the game. Okay, so even more opportunities for self-directed practice. We want to move from internal cues around body movement to external focus. What do I mean by that? Martin, how are we doing for time?
They're just about to finish their ones have finished, so
Okay, great. I'll skip through these 2 stages and then we'll call it a day there. I'll give you a slide as well to take a picture of around reflection. What do I mean by moving from internal focus to external focus?
Bigger picture.
What do you mean by bigger picture?
You're giving them a bigger thing to focus on, so the small stuff automatically does it.
Yeah, so a good example is, if I'm doing a squat, rather than saying I want you to sink your hips, bend at the knee, okay, engage your scapulars, I'm saying I want you to push the floor away. So the focus is on the external movement rather than the internal movement. Okay, and we really want to focus on the feel of the movement, the rhythm of the whole movement rather than its component parts. Okay, so as you were saying earlier, when you break down the component parts, they've now pieced that together, and we want to park that. We want to leave it where it is. And as we targeted earlier, imagery is excellent. If you can get them thinking through the whole movement, imagining the movement, so if you're doing individual reps, 2v1 reps, so on and so forth, if they're observing another participant and they're consciously thinking about the movement as they observe, bang on. Okay, you'd be amazed to know the evidence behind imagery. Right, finally, conscious of time, now assurance. What do we mean by assurance here? Okay? Why would assurance be important in the last stage? Yeah, you want them to have confidence. You don't want them to think or worry or ruminate. Okay? And we basically want to close the lid on that technical change so they don't go back to the older way. They really buy into the new. So we might use challenges and pressure tests in training, simulate competition demands, okay, but make sure it's correctly contextualized. Vary the challenges, in other words, don't let things become easy. Okay, if you repeat the same thing over and over again, they'll just become better at that thing. Okay? And leave sufficient gaps. This comes back to the desirable difficulties, Pete. Space between activities. Sorry I rushed through that last one, but I'm just going to leave you with a slide. So as I said, begin with the end in mind, now we're going to end with the beginning. I asked you of a task, which was around your particular problem that you might be focusing on. I'm going to ask you to take a photo of this and consider it later on. But in other words, as a result of the thinking tools and things that have been presented today, what are you going to start doing? What are you going to stop doing? And what are you going to continue with? Don't have to answer that, it's just a point of reflection. Mark, we're going to have a chance for questions later on, aren't we? So.
Yeah, we'll do a Q&A with yourself.
Excellent. So that's it for today, guys. Thank you for your time.